When Shivaji was born in 1630, the Deccan did not belong to its people. It belonged to whoever had the largest army that year. The Mughal Empire was pressing south, swallowing territories like a slow moving tide. The Deccan Sultanates, Bijapur and Ahmednagar, were busy fighting to survive. Local chieftains bent their loyalty depending on who seemed stronger that season. A tax collector could ruin a village. A passing army could empty granaries in a night. A ruler in a distant court decided the fate of men he would never see. For ordinary people, power meant fear. Inside Shivneri Fort, Jizabai watched all this unfold. She had lived through betrayal, exile, and uncertainty. She knew her husband Shahaji served powerful rulers but owned little freedom of his own. So when her son was placed in her arms, she did not see only a child, she saw a question. Would he grow up to serve or to change things? Shivaji did not grow up in a palace of indulgence. He grew up in a fortress of ideas. At night, Jizabai would sit beside him and speak not as a queen, but as a teacher. She didn't just tell him stories, she made him live inside them. She spoke of Ram, who lost his kingdom but never his dharma. Of Krishna, who defeated stronger enemies through intelligence. Of Bhishma, who stood for duty above life itself. Of ancient Hindu kingdoms where rulers protected their people, not exploited them. But Jizabai did not narrate these tales as a distant legends. She would pause and then ask him, if Ram could fight for his land, why can't our people? If dharma means protecting the weak, who is doing that today? Shivaji did not answer immediately, but the question stayed. She also showed him the suffering outside the fort. When farmers came with complaints, she did not hide them from her son. She let him hear their fears, their anger, their helplessness. Without saying it directly, she was teaching him something far more dangerous than warfare. That a ruler's duty was not power, it was responsibility. By the time Shivaji was 10, Jizabai had already planted the seed of Swarajya in his heart. If Jizabai gave Shivaji purpose, Dadoji Kondadev gave him a method. Dadoji was not sentimental, he was practical, disciplined, and relentless. He believed leadership came from preparation, not birth. He took young Shivaji across the hills of Pune, not as a prince but as a student. They rode through valleys, climbed forts, and studied supply routes. Dadoji made him understand that terrain was a weapon. A hill could protect an army, a forest could hide one, a fort could control an entire trade route. He trained Shivaji to fight with speed instead of weight. Observe before attacking. Understand local people, not just soldiers. Maintain discipline in troops. But more importantly, Dadoji showed him administration. He involved the young Shivaji in revenue matters, land disputes, and village governance. Shivaji saw firsthand how injustice created resentment and how fairness created loyalty. By his teenage years, Shivaji wasn't dreaming of battle, he was thinking like a ruler. By 1646, Shivaji was only 16, but the fire inside him had already grown too large to hide. Torna Fort stood high in the Sahyadris, strong, strategic, and under weak Bijapuri control. Shivaji did not attack blindly. He studied the politics, the loyalties of local officers, the supply of weaknesses. Then he acted quietly. Through negotiation, influence, and precise timing, Torna came into his hand. When the saffron flag rose over its wall, Shivaji stood looking at it for a long time. He had not taken the fort for wealth, he had taken it for something that did not yet exist, a state of his own. For years, Bijapur ignored him. Then they sent Afzal Khan. Afzal Khan was known for crushing enemies without mercy. He marched with a massive army, determined to end this hill chieftain once and for all. On his way, he destroyed temples and spread terror, hoping to provoke Shivaji into a rash action. But Shivaji refused to fight on Afzal Khan's terms. Instead, he chose Pratapgarh, dense forest, steep terrain, narrow paths. The meeting was arranged for November 1659. Both men agreed to come lightly armed. Shivaji prepared carefully. He wore hidden armor beneath his robes. He concealed the Vagnak in his hand. His troops waited silently in the forest. When the two leaders met, Afzal Khan smiled broadly and stepped forward in an embrace. For a moment, everything looked peaceful. Then Afzal Khan tightened his grip and tried to stab Shivaji. But Shivaji was ready. In a flash, the Vagnak tore into Khan's body. Shivaji struck again, breaking free. Outside, Maratha forces launched their attack as planned. The massive Bijapuri army collapsed into confusion. Afzal Khan lay dead, and Shivaji Maharaj's name echoed across the Deccan. He was no longer a local rebel, he was a power. After Afzal Khan's fall, something changed in the minds of the people. Until then, empires had seemed permanent. Now they looked defeatable. Villagers who once feared armies now whispered Shivaji's name with hope. Soldiers began joining him not for pay but for belief. The idea Jizabai had planted years ago was no longer just inside one boy. It had become a movement. By the early 1600s, Shivaji Maharaj had become impossible to ignore. So the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb sent one of his most trusted commanders to crush him, Shaista Khan. The Mughal army entered Pune like a shadow that would not leave. Khan took residence in Lal Mahal, Shivaji's own childhood home. It wasn't just an occupation, it was a message. You are not strong enough to protect even your past. For months, Mughal soldiers filled the streets. Their camps stretched across the city. Spies watched every movement in the hills. Any direct attack would have been suicide. But Shivaji Maharaj never fought battles he could not win. Instead, he chose a night. On a warm April evening in 1663, Pune slept under Mughal control. Torches burned outside Lal Mahal. Guards paced lazily. No one expected danger inside their own stronghold. Just before midnight, a small group of men entered the city, disguised as a wedding procession. Music, torches, covered palanquins. No one stopped them. Inside those palanquins were Shivaji Maharaj's chosen warriors. When they reached Lal Mahal, they slipped through hidden routes Shivaji remembered from childhood. Corridors once walked by a boy now guided a king's strike. The attack lasted minutes. Swords flashed in torchlight. Panic exploded through the palace. Shaista Khan barely escaped with his life, losing fingers in the chaos. His son was killed. Mughal guards scattered in confusion. Before dawn, Shivaji Maharaj was gone. By morning, Pune whispered one thing. The Mughals had the army, but Shivaji had the night. Aurangzeb's prestige took a blow that echoed across India. The raid on Surat in 1664 wasn't just about wealth, it was about power. Surat was one of the richest trading ports in the Mughal Empire, a city where merchants dealt in gold, silk, and jewels from across the world. Shivaji Maharaj did not destroy the city randomly. He targeted Mughal officials and wealthy establishments linked to imperial power. He ensured religious places and common homes were largely spared. This wasn't looting, it was a declaration. If the empire funds war against us, we will strike its spurs. The raid sent shockwaves through the Mughal administration. It proved Shivaji Maharaj could hit not just armies but the empire's lifeline. In 1666, diplomacy forced Shivaji Maharaj into Aurangzeb's court at Agra. He walked into the Mughal capital knowing it was dangerous. Still, he expected recognition as a sovereign power. Instead, Aurangzeb placed him among minor nobles in the darbar, an insult so sharp it cut through ceremony. Shivaji Maharaj's face hardened. This wasn't just disrespect, it was a warning. Soon after, he found himself under effective house arrest. Guards watched every movement. Exit was impossible. The empire believed it had trapped him. But Shivaji Maharaj did not rely on strength alone. He relied on patience. For weeks, he pretended illness. He sent sweets and fruit baskets daily to temples and nobles as offerings. Slowly, guards stopped checking them carefully. Then, one evening, inside those baskets, Shivaji Maharaj and young Sambhaji disappeared. By the time the Mughals realized, they were already miles away. The escape wasn't just survival. It shattered the myth that the Mughal emperor controlled destiny. Across India, people spoke of it like legend. Even in the emperor's court, Shivaji could not be contained. Years of war followed, victories, setbacks, rebuilding. Then came 6 June 1674. At Raigad Fort, priests, nobles, soldiers, and villagers gathered as sacred chants filled the air. Fires burned, drums echoed across the hills. When Shivaji Maharaj sat for coronation, it wasn't just a ritual, it was history being rewritten. For centuries, kings had ruled India under foreign banners. Now, before the world, Shivaji declared Swarajya existed. When he rose as Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, the people did not cheer just for a king, they cheered for the return of self-rule. Even his enemies understood the moment. This was no longer a rebellion, it was a kingdom. In his final years, Shivaji Maharaj focused less on conquest and more on structure. He strengthened administration, built a navy, secured trade routes, organized revenue systems, ensured forts were stocked and governed efficiently. He knew empires did not survive on victories alone. They survived on systems. When he passed away in 1680, enemies hoped Swarajya would crumble. Instead, the Marathas would grow even stronger in the decades that followed. Because Shivaji Maharaj had not built a movement around himself, he had built it around an idea. Some kings lived behind palaces, some lived behind victories, but Shivaji Maharaj left behind something far greater. He left behind belief that people could rule themselves. And once that belief is born, no empire can ever fully kill it.